I can still remember the first time I saw a photograph of a BattleTech Center. It was in a 1991 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, buried towards the back. A full-page ad showing these massive, angular white cockpits with a grainy, futuristic screenshot on a tiny screen. Now, I was a Sega Genesis kid, used to controlling a sprite on a CRT from my bedroom floor. This looked like something from a military installation, and I remember thinking, there's no way this is real, and there's no way I'll ever get to play it. As a teenager living out in the suburbs, a place like that might as well have been on the moon. But the idea of sitting inside a giant robot cockpit, actually piloting the thing with over 80 buttons and a joystick and throttle setup, with other people in the room doing the same thing, it was a fantasy. And in this video, we're going to find out what it was actually like to live in that fantasy. And a couple of years later, I finally got my chance. It was on a family vacation to Chicago, of all places. We were walking through the North Pier Mall, and there they were. A row of about 8 dark pods, looking less like the clean white cockpits from the magazine, and more like a dropship from Aliens. A staff member dressed in a flight suit uniform called us pilots. I immediately became skeptical. I even made fun for my dad for looking confused at the control panel. I figured the whole experience would just be some kind of overpriced, clunky tech demo, but boy was I wrong. That single 10-minute session planted a seed that never stopped growing, and from that day onward, I became a mech junkie, chasing that feeling through every MechWarrior PC game and PlayStation knockoff that I could find. And for those who don't know, BattleTech, which began as a board game, but soon evolved into a tabletop RPG, numerous novels, and the MechWarrior series of video games. And over the next 30 minutes of my experience, I went from being kind of a skeptic to a true believer. But what I didn't know then was that I was standing in the middle of a technological dead end, a multi-million-dollar experiment that was both the most incredible thing I'd ever played and a business model that could never survive the 90s. As Jordan Weisman, the creator of BattleTech, put it, we started out with the misconception that it was going to cost about $300,000 to set up, and in reality, it would cost about $3 million. That was just for the development. The full investment across the centers would end up far higher. So, what was it actually like to play? You're strapped into a fully enclosed cockpit designed by Frog Design. In the original Tesla 1 system, you're looking at a 24-inch color monitor as your main out-of-the-window view. That doesn't sound huge now, but when it's 2 feet in front of your face and you're surrounded by its controls, it just feels enormous. The core loop was simple. You pilot a 100-ton battle mech in a networked deathmatch against other players in the same room, and eventually via ISDN lines against players in other cities. You had a right-hand joystick for aiming and firing your weapons. A left-hand throttle controlled your speed from a walk to a run, and foot pedals steered you from left to right. A similar setup that would later be copied by Capcom for the Steel Battalion controller in 2002 for the Xbox. But here's what it differs from any home games back in that era. You had a second 12-inch monitor displaying your radar, damage readouts, and a tactical map. And there were literally dozens of buttons, switches, and an LED panel for managing your heat scale, weapon systems, and targeting. Weisman explained his design philosophy. I wanted sensory overload and information overload, where part of the challenge was coming to understand what piece of information you need to focus on and when. Now, the standard match was 10 minutes long and preceded by a 5-minute training video. You had a certain amount of armor points on your mech's arms, legs, and torso. Once your center torso was destroyed, you were out. But here's the catch. System 1, the first generation of these pods, was actually really unstable. It could only reliably run 6-player matches, even though some of the sites had up to 16 pods. Frame rates would drop to about 12 to 14 FPS during heavy combat. It was revolutionary, but it was also a temperamental beast. Now let's talk about how it looked. For 1990, standing over someone's shoulder watching the main screen was a trip. The visuals weren't texture-mapped polygons like you'd see in a few years on the PlayStation. This was flat-shaded, real-time 3D, powered by a Texas Instruments CPU originally designed for video titling, normally used for adding titles to TV shows. rotating and scaling things like the logo for a football team, Weisman recalled. That TI chip generated the main view, while a Commodore Amiga 500 handled the secondary radar display. The designers only had a 32 megabyte RAM limit, which is nothing. Actually, Weisman said they built a custom memory card that was almost half a meter square. So to work around these limits, they created a shared geometry system for the mechs. This means 2 sets of legs and 3 sets of arms were combined on 4 central torso chassis. That technical limitation directly defined the look of the now iconic Mad Cat, Vulture, Loki, and Thor mechs. They shared the same legs and arms across different bodies. And seeing 4 of these things lumbering towards you in a randomly generated desert canyon with day, night, or dusk lighting and basic fog effects was incredible. The enemy wasn't an AI sprite, it was your friend, sweating and swearing at you over in the next pod. The only thing missing was any real sense of environmental detail. The ground was just a flat grid. But when you're 14 years old inside that cockpit, you don't care. The immersion was the killer feature. And the immersion started before you even entered the pod. Weisman was a huge Disney fan, and he copied the theme park pre-show concept. He said, one of those observations was how Disney theme parks used a pre-show to build anticipation of the ride ahead. At the BattleTech Centers, players were gathered into a briefing room and shown an instructional video set in the 31st century. Later versions of those briefing videos featured Hollywood actors like Jim Belushi, Judge Reinhold, and Weird Al Yankovic. Weisman recalled that Belushi turned up one day to play, and he summoned up the guts and wandered over and asked whether he would star in their new training video. Weisman said they had no money, but he was incredibly gracious and still shot with us.
Now, I want you to pay close attention to the briefings, because some of you are going to go through 3 or 4 mechs on each mission. Don't let that bum you out. It happens.
The sound design is where the experience became truly overwhelming, especially in the later Tesla systems. The original System 1 and System 2 pods had decent audio, but the Tesla System 4, which launched in 1996, was a different beast entirely. That cockpit had 12 speakers. 12! And to drive that, the system used 2 Creative Sound Blaster Pro EISA cards. When you fired a PPC cannon or stomped your mech through a rock formation, you really felt it in your chest. The roar of jump jets would pan from the front to the rear speakers. It was a 3D audio experience years before EAX or A3D were buzzwords on the PC. Weisman told another great story about how one of his engineers rigged a test. Players tried 2 pods with stereo sound and the other with 5-channel surround sound. And none of the testers actually mentioned the audio. Weisman said, but they all thought the graphics on the surround sound pods were much improved. They didn't interpret it as the sound was better, they just knew it was more immersive, and they attributed it to the graphics. The only downside? It was missing a lot of the memorable soundtrack you might associate with the home mechwarrior games. The soundscape was more about immersive industrial ambience and weapons effects than a musical score. Fortunately, the sheer spatial awareness the audio gave you more than made up for it. It was a critical piece of the puzzle that made you feel like you were in the cockpit, not just playing the game. So, as a huge fan of mechwarrior games on the PC, coming to the BattleTech Center was like a religious experience and a sobering reality check all at once. I mean, at home on my 486, I was playing MechWarrior 2 with a keyboard. But here, I had a joystick, a throttle, and all of those 80 buttons. It was the definitive way to control a mech. The only 3 things that I genuinely dislike about the whole experience, even now, were the cost, the opacity, and the fragility. It was something like $7 to $10 for a single 10-minute match in the early 90s money. That's about $20 today. And if you didn't have a veteran player explaining the heat scale to you, you'd overheat and shut down in the first 2 minutes without even understanding why. So you'd eject and your $10 was gone. Even as a PC gamer, I was frustrated by how much the game hid from you. But when you were in a full 8-player match with everyone communicating, someone calling out targeting data, the good absolutely outweighs the bad because there was simply nothing else like it. One thing I didn't know back then, the post-game was almost as important as the match itself. Weisman called it the bus crash phenomenon. After an adrenaline spike, people need to talk about it. Players were gathered together to discuss the battle, and each received a printout showing their score, where they traveled, who they attacked, and how. People would collect them in binders, Weisman remembered. Laser tag eventually grafted onto these same things. They realized the value of these printouts as well. The centers themselves, rebranded as Virtual World, expanded to 26 locations across the US, Japan, and Canada. But by 1995, the Japan centers were closing. This because of rapid advances in home PC graphics and online gaming made the business model untenable. Why pay $10 for 10 minutes when you could play MechWarrior 2 online over a modem? And then Microsoft purchased the whole operation in 1999 and sold it off. No! How incredibly lame. The original pods then became kind of a lost tech themselves, the very concept from the BattleTech lore where advanced technology is forgotten and irreplaceable. The original CRTs died. Custom chips failed. But here's something the critics didn't predict. The BattleTech Centers essentially invented esports. Weisman said, the esports thing was something we pioneered in the early 90s when we started doing regional tournaments, and then the national and international tournaments, and they were broadcast on television. They added leaderboards across global centers, posted videos of matches online before YouTube even existed, and even shared written interviews with rising stars. So it's been fascinating to watch esports recreate that on a much larger scale, Weisman noted. And look, while playing MechWarrior Online today is excellent, there was a unique level of immersion in those old cockpits and controls. Back then, the graphics felt cutting edge, even if they look pretty outdated today. And heading out with your friends to play giant stomping robots, usually with a meal beforehand and drinks afterwards, created a kind of real-life social experience that felt completely different from modern online gaming, voice chat, or even playing MechWarrior Online together at a LAN party. If you've never played this and are curious, you can still seek out the survivors. Specifically, mechcorps Entertainment in Houston, Texas, operates 18 Tesla 2 pods running BattleTech Firestorm and Red Planet that's open to the public. You can also catch Virtual World Entertainment owner Nick Propwash Smith bringing his pods to Gen Con or Dragon Con every year. And Weisman still sees them. He says, it's pretty funny and rewarding to go to Gen Con, and there's still 20 cockpits set up, and they're running 24 hours a day. I know, the graphics are primitive by today's standards, and the frame rate will chug. But when you sit down, pull the straps, flip the master power switch, you'll understand. You're not only playing a game, you're stepping back into a moment in time when arcades tried to become virtual reality, and, for a brief, glorious moment, they succeeded. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
Looks like a command outpost. Taking this out should get us a nice bonus.